and that song, Mary Did You Know. It inspired today's talk title, which I've called Mary Do You Know. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to make the connection between spiritual living, which is the theme for this month, and some of the qualities and some of the features that are illuminated in the story of Mary. Now, I was raised Catholic, so Mary was a really big deal. I know that some of my Protestant friends, Mary was, yeah, she had Jesus, and that's kind of where the story ended. For me, my grandmother had this set of rosary beads that she had gotten from her mother, so, and my mother still has them. They were handed down for generations, and my grandmother did that rosary every night from the time that she was 15 years old. So she had this profound veneration for Mary. Now, one of the reasons that I think that this is very striking, and one of the reasons that I want to bring it here is that, isn't that amazing? This Mary character in this hugely patriarchal Catholic Church. Yeah. God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit, who's some dude who kind of transmits between the two, the Dad and the Son. There's really very little place for a woman. There's very little feminine energy in that. And yet, somehow, this huge veneration and acknowledgement of the feminine principle just found its way through. And there are all kinds of places and shrines tributing. There's Our Lady of Lourdes. You know, she shows up to 3 children, and people start going there and are healed. People still go there and are healed. There's Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is certainly not the European traditions. So we have our Lady of Lourdes in France, in Lourdes, France, which is pretty European. And then we've got Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is in South America, who draws from Aztec and Mayan and all kinds of indigenous features. And she gives voice to this quality, this Mother of God here. And I know Tan has heard me say this, but I will say it again for those of you who haven't heard it. There's this long-standing sense of connection between Isis, one of the earliest female goddesses, and the Mother Mary. There are qualities of Isis when her husband, Horus, or was it Osiris? Osiris. When her husband Osiris, who was also her brother, was chopped up by his Seth, his protagonist, the antagonist, who really couldn't have anything to do with him, scattered him all over the world. Osiris was really not in a good position because he's all over the world. And it takes Isis to go all over the world and retrieve his body. Mary is an illustration of what's in us. And I really believe it captures some of the qualities of spiritual living that we're suggested to talk about today. Earnest Holmes taught, the great love of the universe must be one with the great law of its own being. And we approach love through law. This then is the teaching, love and law. As the love of God is perfect, so the law of God is perfect. Now we can forget all about the law and know that there is nothing but the Word. The law will be working automatically. We must forget everything else and let our word be spoken with a deep inner realization of love, beauty, peace, power, the great presence of life at the point of our own consciousness. If life is already perfect, then why does it show up the way it appears to show up sometimes?
That's a really good question.
One explanation, and I don't think it's the only explanation, but one explanation is that we have accumulated a variety of beliefs. Or maybe I have accumulated a variety of beliefs, and all of you are all together and haven't done this kind of thing. But in the acquisition of these beliefs, I've learned things like, I can't. I'm not good enough. I don't think so. We come up with obstacles. I've come up with limitations. I'm very obsessive. Now, that can be a quality that can mean that I just spend a lot of time on my reports. So I don't get my reports done as quickly as some of my colleagues. I will just belabor how to say something so that when I communicate with a family, I can have them say, yes, that really captures who my child is. And if I don't capture it, when the parents tell me something else, I will take my report and I will rewrite it so that it matches what the parents say. I offer that this is the same kind of thing that Mary, as a young girl, when she was approached by the angel Gabriel, was encountering. The angel showed up to her and says, "Hail Mary, full of grace." Yo, how you doing? Oh, graceful one. Wait, not me. There must be someone else in the room that you're looking at. It can't be me. Mary did not immediately just rise up, her chest all proud, and say, "Yeah, on your knees, angel. You are in the presence of greatness here, and, I got that." No. Sometimes we need these outer agents. These outer beings. Now, my first teacher in religious science, Kathy Ann Lewis, talked about the idea of angels as high thoughts, high and holy thoughts. Now, it's much easier to carry around our low, not worthy thoughts because they're so familiar. They're so familiar. There was this old familiar unmarried church, and yet Mary came through. It's a higher thought, I believe. The angel Gabriel said, "You are the chosen one." The angel Gabriel wasn't talking about Jesus that we often think of as the chosen one. He wasn't talking about the Buddha or Moses. He was talking about Mary. How often do we feel when we're presented with something? I heard Charlie describe it, that sometimes we just don't think we can do it. Sometimes we are convinced by the old stories that we can't. Now, Mary certainly would have been filled with those old stories. Girls in that time were the property of their fathers, and then they were handed over and became the property of their husbands. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, simply go from this place to this place. You are the daughter of a man, and then you are the wife of a man. You might be the mother of a man. But that was your main role. How are you in relationship to a man? And yet, this high thought says to her, you will bring through the presence, the life of Spirit on earth. Mary didn't, again, say, "Of course I will." That's done. That's easy. Mary was looking around and thinking, "I don't know that I can do this." And the angel told her, "Don't worry. Don't doubt." So I think the first spiritual practice that we can encounter from Mary is a willingness to look at what it is that's holding us back. What are our obstacles? What stands between us and what we long for? Is it a story that we've convinced ourselves to follow? Because those stories get told to us, and in order to be accepted, a lot of times we just go along with it. Isn't it easier to go along with stories than to fight them? How many stories are operating right now? Mary made the bold declaration, "Thy will be done." How open or receptive are we willing to be? No, we've got our stories ahead of us. I'm not sure that I want any will except my own will, which is attached to all of these stories and all of these conditions and all of these limitations that I have established. The lesson that Mary invites us to follow is set down my obstacles and open up to possibility. Now, again, as a Catholic, and other Catholics in the room may remember this, one of the first things that Mary did after she got this news, after she got the news that she was carrying this baby Jesus, she went to help out her cousin, who, against all hope, against all odds, herself had become pregnant. So I think that takes us to that second piece of the spiritual practice. Once we've opened ourselves and allowed things to open and become available, then we are more available. Mary just didn't sit around waiting for gifts. They didn't just hold a shower and bring Toys R Us coupons to Mary so that she could have the crib and all of the nice things. No, she traveled to her cousin Anne. And there's all kinds of stories about the telling when Anne discovered Mary's presence and the presence of the child within Mary, the child within Anne leapt. What if we go in service to others with the expectation that the souls in others will leap at our presence? What if we are carrying the Christ? If we are carrying the Christ, couldn't that possibly change how we think about ourselves moving through the world? It's not just my tired old butt that I am bringing forward into a place. It's that I am bringing something that is completely unknown into the world. In that song, "Mary, Do You Know?" that within her is this life. The blind will see. The lame will leap. The deaf will hear again. The mute will speak. The dead will rise. What if we allow ourselves to be inspiration for the possibilities and the perfections that are out there? One of the great things, in my opinion, about religious science is the whole notion of affirmative prayer. And again, I'm going to go to Charlie for a minute, because Charlie has made these declarations. He said, "I'm going to have this thing." And then it shows up. How many times have we found an affirmation, we've made the affirmation, and unbelievably, it comes true? I think most of you have heard the story where I had the distinct impression at the time when I needed a transplant that I really didn't have very much to offer. And that having a transplant was really a waste of someone else's life so that I could keep living. You know, I had my ex-wife say, you know, if you stop being around, that insurance policy will give your daughters and me a very good life. And she was just very practical. It would have. And I was able to reduce myself to some financial sum and think, well, I guess that's what I'm good for. I remember the story, and how many of you have seen It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. And then there's another one with Marlo Thomas, and I think there's another one since then. But in this It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey just hits his dead end. He feels like there's nothing going right in his life. The movie opens with people all over the world praying for George. I had the very distinct impression that if I were faced in a similar thing, that George Bailey was just a movie. And that if I were facing a similar thing, there would not be any prayers for me, because who could I have inspired or entangled into my life to pray for me? The fact of the matter is, though, that when I got the call that I had an organ waiting for me, I literally had people praying in Europe, in Africa, in India, in Asia, in Australia. I had someone in Antarctica. I had North America. I had South America. I had them all covered in terms of continents. I wouldn't have known that. It was exactly my prayer. It was a very strange manifestation of, I can't believe it unless this were to happen. And that's exactly what happened. In our prayers, in our affirmations, we can call for what feels impossible to us. Because we live in a world of infinite possibility. I'd like us to, just this moment now, think on a time when something that seemed impossible for our life came true. So just close your eyes for a second and come to that place where you might have faced something and you really wanted it. You couldn't imagine how it could show up, and yet it did. Let yourself be with that feeling of it showing up. Let yourself embrace that quality. And as you embrace that quality, consider those words, "You are worth it." This good that is here for you now is your divine right inheritance. This is divinely ordained. This is your entitlement. When you let yourself feel that, do you notice any change? Do you sense any difference? Perhaps your muscles are a little looser. Perhaps your heart's a little bit more open. Perhaps your mind's a little less attached to old stories of obstacles. Perhaps more things become possible than seemed possible before. With that experience, what if we go into the world with an enthusiasm, a liveliness, a lightheartedness that lifts up others, that lifts up others to the notion of possibilities? I really believe that that's what Mary's visit with Anne was about. Anne had discovered she was pregnant after years and years of wanting but not being able to be pregnant. She also ended up having 9 months where her husband was able to shut up. He was struck mute. And again, I just say it's very significant because he was a religious leader. And for a religious leader to be struck mute was really saying something. Sometimes it's in the silence that spirit is most eloquent. Sometimes we have these experiences. I don't know about you, but I can't always put my thoughts and my feelings into the perfect package of words. I can't always convey the story in a way that someone else will get. I think that's why so many times stories and movies hold so much power, because they capture a quality. They capture the feeling. They convey the essence that we've all known, but we haven't known how to communicate it. In the story The Nightmare Before Christmas, Jack encountered Christmas, something he had never seen before. And he was so moved by it, he wanted to bring it to the town of Halloween. And clearly their interpretation of it did not convey the same level of experience that Jack first encountered, so that when he's going all over the world delivering his little treasures of bloody dolls and chewing creatures, he couldn't quite capture it. And yet Santa, who survived the whole thing, was able to put it into words and was able to transcend the mistakes. Sometimes we pick the wrong story, but the right story can still come through. Now, one of the last things that I'd like to think about with respect to Mary can you imagine going from Nazareth to Bethlehem on a donkey?
A donkey, 9 months pregnant.
In the winter.
In the winter.
No.
Well,
Or even if it was in
Western winter.
in March, as some other people believe, or no matter really when it is, riding on a donkey, 8 months pregnant, 9 months pregnant, really not a pretty scene. You know, your Airbnb has, you show up and they do not have your reservation. How many times do we feel like we are like Mary? We're dragged behind somebody else who is going somewhere else because they've been ordered by something else to do something. And we're just along for this long, miserable ride. In the story, you don't hear about Mary complaining.
No.
You don't hear about Mary saying, Joseph, God dang it, why the heck couldn't you have been from a much more local place? I don't know why my father betrothed me to you, but for goodness sake, couldn't it have been a little closer? Joseph, what were you thinking? Where's the reservation? I'm not particularly comfortable here. Mary is not a person known for her complaints. In fact, Mary was somebody who was able to take the lumps that life gave her and live through them. She was able to find the perfection where it certainly doesn't look perfect. That's the third piece that I invite us to do. No matter what is before us, how do we just be and remember what we're carrying? Maybe we need someone else to remind us. Maybe we need a story, like the story of Mary and Joseph on their way to Nazareth. They made their best of the stable. That has been recreated how many movies and things. I remember the most recent variant of it that I had seen was on the Bones television show, where when Bones was pregnant, they were on a case, and she ended up giving birth to their daughter in the place where the cows and the horses were, because it just wasn't going to wait. The baby was just coming. Sometimes that's how life shows up. It's just going to happen. We may want to plan. We may want to be ready. Sometimes for all our plans and for all our readiness, life just shows up. You don't hear in the Christmas carols about how the angels showed up and they were trying to soothe Mary because she'd had a very trying period of time. You don't hear about the Magi who had received visions and stories to show up. They didn't bring Prozac or Xanax to help Mary cope with the fact that she had had a very long, difficult pregnancy. What struck them and what strikes us in that story is the loving mother of the child. That there is this beautiful new creation. But the fact is that the new creation doesn't show up out of the blue. It shows up through Mary. In religious science, we think about creation as a circle, where the circle contains all. And then that circle gets divided into three parts, with mind or spirit, with the law or the soul, and then with form. And ultimately it's an artificial division, because how do we pick apart form from spirit, mind from matter? It's all infused. There's soul in it all. There's soul in us all. The teaching symbol then also has this triangle that comes through it, that mind comes through the soul, comes through the law, and comes into form. But form then informs the soul, and it informs mind. It's this reciprocal process. Creation goes in both directions. Mind gives rise to form, but form also informs mind. The soul has been frequently characterized by Earnest Holmes and been endlessly argued because he used the word feminine to characterize that middle section. And people have been very offended and felt that Earnest Holmes really missed the boat. How can he call the mind masculine and the soul feminine? What's that all about? I'm not here to defend that notion of the soul as feminine, but I would like to acknowledge the age-old impression of feminine as more receptive. As a man, there was an assertion to me that I needed to be a certain way. And that assertion did not involve receptivity. It did not involve passivity. It did not involve receiving. It was about going out and being a man and showing yourself. And frequently, little girls are taught something different. Even now, despite years of feminism, I think if we even look at our last presidential election, the first woman presidential candidate could not move from that place of receptivity and receive any respect. And yet she couldn't receive any respect for assuming some of the features that were masculine. She could be neither masculine nor feminine and be acknowledged. Earnest Holmes, in some ways, I think, was really ahead of his times. If this circle is all one, how do we bring that masculine and feminine together? How do we look at when we are called into activity, that so-called masculinity? How do we look at our own feminine principles, our own times of receptivity? Mary beautifully illustrates a fluidity. Her story opens, "Hail Mary." And the first response is, "Not me, not me, not me." But then she overcomes that. And she steps into what would appear to be a masculine principle. She didn't ask her mom and dad, "Hey, can I go visit Anne?" You just hear in the stories that she went. She did a very different thing. And Joseph, masculinity, should have put her aside. But he didn't. He received a dream telling him, "Stop that. Don't do it." You'll see why. Mary and Joseph both had characteristics that were masculine and feminine. I think it's pretty powerful, again, given that this comes from the Catholic Church, where there's been a much greater emphasis on patriarchy. And yet, within the story is contained that notion of receptivity. So the invitations, again, are, there may be obstacles ahead of us. How do we set them aside? How do we move forward into action? How do we bring ourselves forward in a way that inspires, that impresses, that uplifts? How do we look for the miracles in our own lives and keep bringing them forward, rather than pulling out those old obstacles and those old stories? How do we be inspirations? How do we be like Mary? How do we know that the great I am is within us now? And so it is.